We've got a crazy thing going on but at the United Nations right now, where because the United States has decided that they are going to recognize recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, which, funny enough, it is, that the United Nations is going to vote against and condemn the United States. Nikki Haley is the UN's United States ambassador at the UN, and she's made very clear she's not impressed with what's going on.
Thank you, Mr. President. In this meeting, I will not use Council's time to address where a sovereign nation might decide to put its embassy and why we have every right to do so. I will address a more appropriate and urgent concern. This week marks the one-year anniversary of the passage of Resolution 2334.
So Nikki Haley
in December 2016
used her veto it's the first time the United States has used its veto at the UN since 2011. In that time, Russia has used its veto 16 times. Just to give you a point of comparison, anytime someone wants to bring up anything about Syria or Ukraine, well, the Russia moves in there and uses their veto. The U.S. has used their veto for the first time since 2011, and it was to shut down a Security Council resolution earlier this week that was going to condemn the United States for recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Tomorrow, the United Nations General Assembly will take a vote. And I really don't know which way Canada is going to come down. I hope that we either vote the right way or that we abstain. And for me, the right way is to not condemn the United States. But condemnations of Israel are far too common when it comes to the UN. Nikki Haley has put out, both in terms of back-channel communications, official communications, and on Twitter, that the United States is taking names. They will look at who votes which way, and they will act accordingly. In fact, going so far as just a few hours ago to point out that President Trump said to her, "Let them vote how they want. We'll save a ton," effectively saying foreign aid is now on the table. Elliot Tepper joins me now. He's a professor in the political science department at Carleton University, distinguished man of on many counts, and someone that follows these sorts of things. Professor Tepper, thanks for the time.
Good evening, Brian.
I'm just sitting here fascinated by what's going on because, I know a lot of people want to dump on Donald Trump for the fact that it's Wednesday or that the sky's blue. But on this one, I happen to think that he's kind of on the side of the angels on this. United States presidents going back to Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, George W. Bush all said that Jerusalem was the capital of Israel. Joe Clark did, and he's the first one to actually act on it. And I think this is a good thing. What do you think is going on with this UN showdown right now, and how do you think Canada will act?
Well, I can't answer your last question there. I've not seen any indication. What's going on there, there's so many different dimensions of this. First of all, what is going on is the implementation of America's position. You listed the presidents who have backed this in the past, as well as Joe Clark, although he backed off from it.
And just this past June, I think it passed unanimously again in the Senate. It was 90-0.
Yes, which is unheard of in that Senate. But this goes back to 1995, where there was a resolution in the Senate that passed almost unanimously again. So this is a bipartisan, long-standing position of the United States. And what triggered this particular series that we're talking about now is that in that same the Senate resolution was, this is going to happen unless the President of the United States signs a formal declaration, a waiver, that it would not at that moment be in America's security interest to go ahead and recognize Jerusalem as the capital and then have an embassy there. And the President of the United States have always done that. and it has to be done every 6 months, a very short tether by the Senate, trying to tie the American president to go ahead and implement this policy. But Donald Trump, as he did with Iran, said, I don't like signing these 6-month waivers, and I'm not going to do it anymore.
And so early in his term, he would have done it. So he had to do this at least once.
Yes, he did it once, as he did with the Iran once, and he apparently didn't want to do it again. But what he said, that this is what Nikki Haley has pointed out, and which did not get reflected at all at the United Nations, was that he said, yes, we're going to implement American foreign policy on this. No doubt Israel's capital is Jerusalem. Everybody knows it. It's clearly obvious. It has been, he didn't say this, but it has been for 2,000 years. And but we are not predetermining any boundaries or borders, and we still favor a two-state solution, and we want negotiation. So his vocabulary echoed United Nations resolutions, except that he said that two things. One is we recognize there is a capital in Israel, and Israel has a right to determine its own capital. That's Jerusalem. But the second part is we are going to move the capital, that is the American
embassy
capital, from Tel Aviv, where it is temporarily there, they say, and to Jerusalem once we get around to it. He did not announce, and this has to be emphasized, that he was actually moving the American embassy from Tel Aviv. Had he wanted to do so, Brian, he could have done it at that same time. There's a consulate, a large consulate, in Jerusalem, but what he said was, basically, in the great by and by, we will move our capital.
My understanding is that most countries that have serious diplomatic relations with Israel have a larger, quote-unquote, consulate in Jerusalem than they have an embassy in Tel Aviv. And I was watching CNN the day that Trump made this announcement. I was watching CNN, and Jake Tapper, a man I have an awful lot of respect for. Some will, on all sides, attack him. But I find him to be a pretty straight shooter. And he's interviewing this guy who'd been a diplomat under Obama and said, well, I'm guessing that you're not happy about this. And he said, actually, it's kind of acknowledging reality. And this guy explained how when he was at the embassy in Tel Aviv, he'd get up in the morning and they'd all get into the car and drive to Jerusalem so that they could do work.
Yes, because that's where the capital is. The furor over this does not reflect well on anybody or anything. Let's start with Donald Trump. One could say that he deserves a lot of credit for this, but you could also say that he was playing to his evangelical base and a couple of his donors, and he upset what was our, how can we put this, in a volatile region where everything is blowing up everywhere. He then adds another layer of uncertainty and potential violence in one of the few very quieter places of the region. So was that necessary to do at this time? So you can say there could be unintended consequences, there could be ripple effects, and I see some happening now. On the other hand, you can also say the United Nations has been backing in a sense, a bogus situation for so long. It's ossified and it needed to be shaken up. There is no peace process underway. The Israelis say if the Palestinians want peace, they should sit down with us and stop messing around at the United Nations and trying to get legitimacy anywhere except, here. And the Palestinians say, well, we have a lot of conditions before we'll sit down. And that goes on. So the peace process is in a sense, dormant. There is no peace process.
I think the last time there was a real peace process might have been early in Obama's first term.
Yes.
And not due to anything that the former President Obama did, but because of the situation on the ground, maybe even before. I mean, I'm thinking back to 2006 when Hamas was elected into the Gaza Strip, and that happened around the same time that Stephen Harper was elected here, and one of the first foreign affairs acts that he did was to say we're going to cut off funding to Hamas or to the West Bank because we won't back terrorists.
A few things to be said. First of all, Jerusalem clearly is going to be now and into the indefinite future a flashpoint. It is special to everybody. It's special to the Muslims. It's special to Jews. It's special to Christians. It's special to certain political groups. It's special. So Jerusalem is a sensitive area, no matter what. So that's one thing to say. What we now see is ripple effects that are being opened up. The PLO, Fatah, Abbas's head of it, Abbas is now going to China, sent envoys to China, and an envoy to Russia saying, we no longer want the United States to be a mediator. We want you to come in and be a mediator. So they're saying a space has been created for outsiders. Russia has said for a while, look, we want to get involved here. We want to expand. We will...
Really? I mean...
Oh, yeah. They've been offering to... They want a summit. They've been calling for a summit.
Let me just ask,
Moscow.
though, if you are Benjamin Netanyahu, and you don't even have to belong to Netanyahu's party, you can be a much more liberal Jew, a much more liberal Israeli, do you trust Russia to negotiate on behalf of Jews?
No, what happened, offer was made a while ago, and you know, in fact, there's quite good relations between Netanyahu and Vladimir Putin because they see eye to eye that they'd better not run into each other in Syria. So there's security cooperation de facto. But no, Russia is clearly not an acceptable interlocutor. But China has quite unexpectedly said, yeah, we are interested. So they are trying to fill what they perceive to be a shrinking America pulling back, and they're wanting to step into this area. It would be highly unwise for China or any other state to say that they have the capacity to make a settlement here, because it's quite clear that, you know, if John Kerry couldn't do it with full backing of the Obama administration as recently as this last administration, this is not going to be an easy situation to solve. It was a dormant issue. It's now a hot issue, and we aren't sure where it's going to go.
Speaking with Professor Elliot Tepper from Carleton University in their political science department, Professor Tepper, I've been watching this for all of my adult life.
Yes.
Ronald Reagan wanted a settlement. George H.W. Bush wanted a settlement. Bill Clinton pushed hard. George W. Bush pushed hard. Barack Obama pushed hard. I don't doubt the will of any of these men to want to see an actual settlement. And I'm not going to sit here and say, well, I'm more conservative, so I'll like the conservatives, but not the Democrats. I think they all wanted to do their best. But I'm not sure that there is a settlement to be had, is my point.
When Donald Trump said, I'm the new guy here and I want a settlement and we have a process underway, one of the interesting things about the Middle East, there's so many interesting things. First of all, I rarely accept anything at face value about the Middle East. It's one reason I don't like commenting on it publicly, because what you see isn't what's happening or what you get. But what we see is Donald Trump saying, I'm coming at it fresh, and I want to reach a settlement. The Middle East, in a sense, had moved on from the Israeli-Palestinian crisis. It had been said by everybody, look, this is the central issue, it's the core issue, there's no other issues in the Middle East, and now we know there's a lot of other issues in the Middle East, and even if there had been a settlement, Syria would still happen, the collapse of Iraq, ISIS emerging, all of that would have happened, and kind of the falseness of this situation, that is, the perpetuation of a crisis because it had utility for the neighboring states to compete with each other for regional dominance by saying they love the Palestinians more and they hated the Israelis more than the other regional powers. All of that was beginning to look passé and stale, and in fact an increasing overlap of interest, parallel interest have been emerging as the Sunni states led by Saudi Arabia say, look, Iran is really the problem here. They're on the rampage. They're gaining everywhere. We have to organize to see to it that Iran doesn't expand its influence even further. We want to push them back.
And that's still going on with the Saudis taking out a missile over Riyadh.
Yes.
So there's a lot more going on, as you say.
And the Palestinians, in effect, were left abandoned, except at a verbal level, up until now. So now it's what I've been watching for, Brian. Will the old pattern really resurrect itself? The old pattern being, as I've just described it in brief and, and not too kindly, the competition to say, well, we care more than you do about the Palestinians, and we're going to now do everything for them. They actually do everything except, remove the misery of the Palestinian people. So did that pattern resurrect itself now? Certainly at the United Nations we're going to see it. The General Assembly, if they followed their own rules, cannot have a special session unless half of its members call for one, which means close to 100 states have already said, yes, we support.
Wow. And the biggest lobby group is the Organization of the Islamic Conference. So I think that's a foregone conclusion. It'll be interesting to see how Canada votes, but I do have to wrap it there. Professor Tepper, thanks so much.
Well, it's an endlessly fascinating situation and baffling.
All right. Thanks for the time.
Take care.
Professor Elliot Tepper from the Carleton University Political Science Department.